Hello. Thank you very much for coming. I actually feel sorry for my brother because I'm gonna criticize his film in my presentation. But anyway, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present my work at the Nam Center of Korean Studies. Today's presentation is part of my ongoing research on racial or ethnic otherness and multiculturalism in Korean cinema. I would like to begin with a personal account of how I began this research. When I first came to the US about 10 years ago to study film at the University of Southern California, I had a vague idea that I wanted to study Korean or Asian film. Then I suddenly opened my eyes to a new issue that I hadn't really thought about before while living in Korea, which is race. Coming from a culturally homogeneous country, or at least that's what I believed in at the time, I became fascinated with the cinematic representation of race and otherness, especially the images of Asians in Hollywood films. So I wrote my PhD dissertation on Hollywood representation of Asian martial arts against the backdrop of US politics of race and US-Asian relations. Flash forward 10 years, now I observe the representation of racial or ethnic otherness emerging in Korean cinema, which surprises me and provokes a feeling of uncanniness inside me. So it was natural that my interests have shifted to the ways in which Korean cinema imagines otherness during its transformation into a multicultural society. As of December 2010, the number of foreign residents in South Korea has reached 1.2 million, accounting for 2% of Korea's population. The largest segments of this population is temporary migrant workers, about 0.5 million, including both Korean core ethnics and non-Korean ethnic foreign nationals, mostly coming from other developing Asian nations, such as China, Mongolia, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, and Uzbekistan. Their numbers are projected to multiply in coming years due to industrial demands and economic growth in Korea. Despite the contribution of migrant labor to the Korean economy, massive migration of foreign workers has caused uneasiness among Korean public. It has brought wide-ranging political, economic, and ideological impacts on Korean society, which until now has maintained strong ethnic homogeneity and an ethnocentric culture. Korea not only has to deal with the new social challenges such as illegal migration, racism, and infringement of human rights, but also confront fundamental questions about its national identity, which used to be unanimously defined as one-blooded ethnic nation. Growing ethnic diversity in the South Korean population demands a re-examination of Koreans' national identity and its relationship with other Asian countries where most migrants are coming from. Reflecting changing demographics and current social climate, a handful of Korean films have produced stories about migrant workers residing in Korea, diversifying what used to be a monocultural national cinema. It is indeed a noticeable new phenomenon within the past few years to observe the appearance of non-Korean ethnics on Korean screens as leading or supportive characters. So what does this signify? How do these films reflect changes in Korean society and envision Korea's shifting identity in world politics? How do they partake in generating meaningful social debates on eminent cultural diversity and new modern nationhood? This presentation examines the representation of South or Southeast Asian migrant workers in 3 Korean independent films, whereas Ronny, Bandhobi, and Banga. It discusses the political possibilities and limits of cultural imagination of racial otherness in the context of the multicultural tone in Korean cinema and Korea's emergence as a sub-empire in the Asian region. Or independently produced, these 3 films are thematically interrelated. Coming from liberal or humanistic perspective, they present a critical viewpoint of a global Korean economy and marginalized both the Korean and migrant working classes, and also drew attention prevalent racism against migrant workers among native Koreans. While they seem burdened with the political correctness, Each film manages to avoid becoming a simple political track by successfully interweaving political, cultural, social criticism with each filmmaker's unique vision and film style. Each film adopts a popular genre formula to make difficult social issues more accessible and relatable to Korean audiences, without compromising artistic integrity. On the one hand, I acknowledge that these films represent an important intervention to monocultural Korean cinema and constitute nascent phase of Korean cinema's exploration of multicultural Korean society. However, it is too simplistic to celebrate these films as a simple progressive moves. The emancipatory possibilities of the three films are ultimately circumscribed by ideological limits inherent in their common narrative structure. They simultaneously challenge and reinforce commonly held notions of Korean national state, citizenship, and racial hierarchy. In my presentation, I first discussed how these films diversify monocultural Korean cinema and broaden the scope of national cinema. Next, I explore how these three films address Korea's communal social problems and attempt to re-envision Korea's new identity as a multicultural nation. Finally, I reveal how their progressive nature is undermined by the common ideological rhetoric found in all three films. The three films challenge monocultural Korean cinema on two different levels, a representational mode and an industrial production mode. I use the term monoculture stress not only the lack of cultural diversity in Korean cinema, but also the current monolithic mode of film production or film practice that has dominated the local film industry for the past decade. As the myth of the one-blooded ethnic nation has been the backbone of the Korean nationhood, historically, Korean cinema has primarily functioned as a national cinema of ethnic Koreans, by ethnic Koreans, and for ethnic Koreans. However, given the increasing numbers of foreign residents and the constant transborder movements of peoples, commodities, capital, and culture between Korean peninsula and outside the world, including the 7 million Koreans living in diasporic communities and other nation-states, it is imperative to re-examine the scope and the meaning of Korean national cinema and the mechanism of Korean film industry. Careful attention should be paid to who is included or excluded in cinematic representation and narrative formation of Korean cinema, as well as who is privileged or marginalized in access to industrial resources and filmmaking processes. I draw attention to these films because they constitute a salient shift in media representation of minorities and otherness in Korean cinema. In his film view of Bandhobi, Derek Elley notes that Bandhobi's casting of a South Asian migrant worker as a leading character is revolutionary in the traditionally monocultural South Korean cinema. I apply this idea to the other films, although in the case of Banga, migrant worker characters remain peripheral, and the film significantly undermines its promise by casting an ethnic Korean actress to play the role of Vietnamese woman. Three films diversify the production mode in the contemporary Korean film industry. The Korean film industry has achieved remarkable success both in domestic and international markets since 1999. Arguably, such renaissance of Korean cinema came with the phenomenal success of the first Korean blockbuster, Shiri. How many of you have seen the movie? Oh, few. So amidst the country's economic crisis and subsequent IMF crisis, which hurt the nation's pride deeply, it is at this time that movie-going turning into an act of patriotism. Simultaneously, blockbuster filmmaking has become the most favorable, viable, and popular mode of production. Many scholars agree that such a transformation has brought rather negative effects on the local industry. Blockbusters push non-mainstream or independent films to the margins, and few newly formed media conglomerates control most of the production, distribution, and exhibition by releasing their blockbusters through self-owned multiplex theaters. Given these circumstances, the three films deserved critical attention in preserving a declining mode of independent filmmaking that allows filmmakers to exert more control over their production and incorporate uncompromising voices. It is not surprising that all three films were independently produced and distributed. The production costs for three films are extremely low for producing any quality feature films. Both Where's Ronny and Bandhobi were exhibited in limited art house movie theaters and ultimately failed at box office. The only exception is Banga, which turned out sleeper hit. Eventually expanding to over 250 screens, Banga generated profits of 7 million. This success is largely due to the film's popular genre formula as a comedy and its outright mainstream film style. So at this point, I like to sketch out how each film adopts different storytelling genres and film style. Shim Sang-gook's debut film Where's Ronny roughly follows a trope of low budget art cinema. The story unfolds when In-ho, a 30-something married man who experiences financial problem in running his taekwondo academy, plans a special demonstration event to boost his economic standing. However, it ends up with an unexpected embarrassing accident in which he is knocked out by a simple strike by Ronny, the Bangladeshi migrant worker. So you can see that the very horrified Korean faces, right? To retrieve his broken ego and pride, he takes on a vengeful journey looking for Ronny, who is nowhere to found. During the pursuit, he encounters another Bangladeshi migrant worker, Duhin. As their relationship develops from antagonism to friendship, his ordeal turns into a journey in search of his own meaning of life. The film can be classified as a road movie, featuring unusual Korean Bangladesh male bodies on the road. The film deviates from the conventional road movie, however, as the locales are limited to In-ho's taekwondo academy and the neighborhood where his daily routine takes place. Yet In-ho eventually ventures into unknown territories, including a segregated ethnic ghetto in his neighborhood and even a journey to Bangladesh in the end. Using the genre of road movie as a metaphor, the film implies that Korea's encounter with the developing Asia is still mysterious, unfamiliar, yet unavoidable voyage to the 21st century. Bandhobi is the most politically engaged film among the three. Director Dong-il is known as one of the most political filmmakers for his blatant criticism of Korea's social and political systems. Bandhobi portrays an unlikely friendship between rebellious Korean teenager Min-seo and Bangladeshi migrant worker Karim. Bandhobi is in fact in Bengali word, meaning friend, and the film is the first Korean film with a Bengali title. The film pushes the envelope by showing this transgressive couple kissing each other. It provoked emotion of roar in online debates, and Mabul Alam, who played Karim, even received a death threat. The critical acclaim of the film is attributed to the film's unique black comedy, criticizing Korean society with the meticulous details and unconventional Brechtian distanciation. Constantly keeping a handheld camera at a distance from its characters, the film never uses any close-up or dramatic background music. Preventing the audience from empathizing with the character personally, the film elicits an intellectual response and a critical engagement with the events on screen. Banga lies at the opposite end of the spectrum of Bandhobi for its explicit mainstream film style and depoliticized story. The film title Banga derives from the Korean protagonist Bang Tae-sik's bogus Bhutanese name, as well as a shortened Korean slang, which means nice to meet you, 반갑습니다, which clearly suggests the direction and tone of the film as a comedy. Unable to find a job as Korean, Tae-sik disguises himself as a Bhutanese migrant worker and succeeds in landing a job in a chair factory. Because of his dark skin tone, petite physique, and pitiful look, Tae-sik is often misunderstood or assumed to be South or Southeast Asian by both Koreans and migrant workers. Tae-sik's mishaps as a disguised migrant worker and his encounters with 5 real migrant workers from Nepal, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Uzbekistan are the major sources of laughter. The intense dramatic conflict and gratifying plot resolution is accompanied by the excessive use of melodramatic music and cinematic effects. Skillfully crisscrossing between sentimental and comic modes, the film appeals to the middle-class morality of mainstream Korean audiences who may sympathize with the minority characters but do not want to seriously think about the harsh lives of migrant workers. Despite the different styles and genre formulas, the 3 films share a common narrative structure. Each film unfolds when a Korean protagonist coming from a marginalized or oppressed social class encounters migrant workers, reluctantly befriends them, and gradually opens his mind or her mind and is reborn as a mature and culturally tolerant person. Through this shared structure, the 3 films reveal new social problems in Korea, which I identify as follows. Number 1, the detrimental effects of Korea's globalization on both the Korean working class and the migrant working class. Number 2, ingrained racism in Korean society. And finally, number 3, the inadequacy of Korea's ethnocentric nationalism and national identity. It is notable that all 3 Korean protagonists come from a socially marginalized and underprivileged class. The suffering of underclass Koreans is a primary concern of all 3 films. Yet, interestingly, their suffering is juxtaposed with migrant workers' struggle for a survival in Korea. They suggest that economic hardship can be the common ground that brings them together. Since the 1960s, South Korea has undergone a rapid modernization and industrialization, often labeled in various ways, such as the miracle of Han River, compressed modernity, and turbo capitalism. Under the glamorous surface of Korea's explosive economic growth, however, the extreme polarization of the classes took place. During the military dictatorships of the 1960s and 70s, the state government protected the interests of chaebol, Korean conglomerates, while suppressing labor movement. Even after the installment of civilian governments, neoliberal economic reforms have further worsened the condition of working class. All 3 films deal with the wretched situations of Korean underclass who do not receive any benefits from Korea's economic growth. Both Where's Ronny and Banga are set in Ansan, the industrial city where many migrant workers have formed impoverished ethnic enclaves since the 1990s. Both films depict the economic condition of Korean natives in Ansan as no better than that of migrant workers. While the Korean working class is not a recipient of Korea's economic miracle, migrant workers suffer a dual form of exploitation: Korea's global capitalism and racism. Korea's rapid economic growth of the 1980s resulted in the acute labor shortages, especially in 3D manufacturing industries. The job opportunities in Korea have lured migrant labor from less developed Asian countries to feed up small or medium-sized industries. The shrinking birth rate and decrease of economically active population also necessitated the opening of the labor market. In addition, I argue that Hallyu phenomenon, Korea's rise to a cultural powerhouse, has played a critical role in mobilizing labor migration. Translated as a Korean wave, Hallyu refers to the explosion of Korean popular culture in Asia, including film, TV drama, and music. So finally, Gangnam Style proves that Hallyu landed in US. Right? This culture trend has popularized the image of Korea as modern, affluent, and prosperous dreamland, and promulgated the fantasies of Korean modern life. in a glamorous and luxurious consumer style. For migrant workers, the Korean modernity appears more easily accessible and obtainable than Western modernities due to geographical proximity and supposedly shared Asian cultures and values. Many migrants' Korean dream, however, is often shattered upon their arrivals. They experience discrimination and infringement of human rights. As a result, they still live in a poverty as if living in their home countries. While the Korean government has revised foreign labor policy multiple times, many scholars and labor activists point out that the government's social reforms are designed to cope with the industrial demands and Korean union requests, and to self-promote its image as being culturally inclusive. This all points to the fact that Korea's rise to economic and cultural clout in the Asian region makes Korea act like a sub-empire. First introduced by Kwon-hing Chen, the sub-empire is an adequate term to describe the newly rising powers of East Asian nation-states since the 1990s. Chen discusses Taiwan's rise to a sub-empire as what he defines, quote, a lower-level empire that depends on the larger structure of imperialism, unquote. According to him, within the neo-colonial structure, Taiwan's own economic and political and cultural structure is subordinated to United States and Japan, but its targets of expansion are politically, economically weaker countries. Jin Kyung-lee adopts this notion to describe Korea's new position in Asian region and criticizes its capitalist exploitation of cheap migrant labor from Southeast Asia. I agree with this notion of a sub-empire because it fairly illustrates the current Korean nation-state's use of unjust power, unfair control of human labor. The three films pay attention to how migrant laborers have to endure labor exploitation. Bandhobi uses lurid visual metaphors to highlight that. In the beginning of the film, audience observes from a bird's-eye view that Karim is entering one-way street, but in the wrong direction. So you can see this arrow, the giant forbidden arrow mark on the ground. It indicates that he is moving towards a prohibited area. Throughout this shot, the film underscores how migrant workers are perceived as unwelcome in Korea. It also hints that many obstacles will lie in wait for migrant workers as they voluntarily enter a forbidden territory. Another striking mise-en-scène in the film is a contrast in the frame, which juxtaposes Karim's shabby housing. So he lives in truck container with the high-rising apartment buildings in the background. This shot highlights the extreme poverty which migrant workers live in to underscore that Korea's economic prosperity is in fact based on the exploitation of migrant labor. So at this point, I'd like to show you the short clip from Bandhobi, which I found effectively criticized both Korea's racism and its capitalist system. The sequence begins with Karim confronting the former boss, Mr. Shin, who has been avoiding paying Karim's undue salary. I apologize there will be no subtitle, but you will easily understand what's going on, and I will explain the details after viewing. This is big enough. Sounds good. So he's saying, "Are you threatening me?" Yeah. So he's yelling at him, saying that just give me more time. Okay, I will pay you, but just give me more time. But which is obviously a lie. So have been offering you to stay, work. And so he's pouring racial slurs saying that just go back to your country. but he suddenly collapsed with his previous, heart conditioning, health condition. So he's disappearing in busy streets of Seoul in clouds. So now we see him packing his belongings in his room. And you see the white bandage on his hand because he has hurt himself. So now he's back to his work and ask him to take him back.
그만큼 우리도 리스크 생겼으니까 월급은 저번보다 좀 적을 거야. 자, 여기 사인하고.
Okay, I think that's enough. So this sequence not only depicts Korea's racism, but also how Korean economy abuses and abandons migrant workers in Korea. Karim has to endure racial slurs and physical assault from Koreans and has to go back home without getting paid. Even worse, being a poor migrant, his movement is severely restricted. The film employs an airplane as a visual motif to highlight migrant laborers' immobility and the extreme condition of constraint. We as audiences believe that Karim has left because we saw the airplane after him packing his belongings. However, next cut shows that Karim returns to his workplace and asks his Korean boss to take him back as undocumented. While it is the Korean boss who benefits from Karim's developed work skills and Korean language proficiency, his Korean boss emphasized that Karim's salary will be even less since he himself takes a risk of hiring him illegally. Whereas Ronny touches upon how pervasive racial stereotypes of migrants as thieves who steal jobs from domestic workers or as criminals who jeopardize public safety is constructed on ungrounded speculation and rumors. Inho's hometown launches a voluntary neighborhood watch team to protect themselves from migrant workers' so-called potential crime. In the name of defense, Inho's hot-tempered neighbor turns over Ronny's unlicensed cart on the street, acting if his neighborhood watch uniform gives him an entitlement to exert lawful enforcement. This episode highlights that it is Koreans who exert unjust and illegitimate violence without guilt against migrant workers. This incident motivates Ronny to come to Hino's taekwondo studio and revenge on Koreans through legitimate violence, which is taekwondo. It shows that even the economically depleted Korean working class sees itself as superior to migrant working class, even though they are no better than migrant laborers in terms of economical and social status within the Korean social hierarchy. There are various factors behind Koreans' racism against Southeast Asian or South Asians. Korea's economic development as a sub-empire has impacted its national vision as superior to developing countries in Asia, which have quickly transformed to racial categories. The notions of race and ethnicity are often conflated in Korean culture. From Western perspective, all ethnicities in the Asian continent are lumped together in one singular term of Asian race. However, from Koreans' perspective, Southeast Asians or South Asians are not equal Asians of the same race as Koreans, but inferior ethnicities or races due to the economic status of their home countries as well as their skin color. Anti-Southeast Asian racism also can be seen as an extension of anti-Black racism in Korea, which is a result of uncritical internalization and acceptance of the Western imperialist notion of racial hierarchy. Bandhobi brings in the pervasive U.S. influence to criticize racism and contemplates the tempered triangular relation between Korea, the U.S., and the rest of Asia. The film indicts American imperialism through a blatant criticism of a pro-American Lee Myung-bak presidency. The film was shot during the sweeping Candlelight vigils in Korea in May 2008. U.S. beef imports have been a contentious issue in Korea-U.S. relations for a decade. The Korean government blocked most imports of U.S. beef in 2003 because of the general public's fear of mad cow disease. However, in 2008, the Lee government attempted to reopen the Korean market to the U.S. beef, which led the country's largest anti-government protests in 20 years. The most noticeable element in these protests were the participation of large numbers of teenage girls who had been traditionally excluded from the politics. They took to the street out of urgent fear that they would become the first consumers of the imported U.S. beef. They believed that the meat importers would supply cheap American beef to the school cafeterias first, because they are unable to afford more expensive homegrown beef. Protesters adopted the iconic cartoon images of a young girl holding a candle, and this image became the unifying symbol of the demonstration. So you see that how this iconic image was adopted to different generations. So this is a candle grandma, and candle bachelor, and candle kindergartners. Although the film does not literally show Min-seol demonstrating in protest, it indicates that she is an incarceration of a candle girl. The last common problem of Korea addressed by three films is the ethno-nationalism and an essentialist Korean identity. Challenging the idea that Koreanness is inherently fixed and exclusionary, the three films attempt to re-envision Korea's national identity as flexible, hybrid, and inclusive. In Banga, a new Korean identity is envisioned through a comical identity crisis that Taeshik undergoes as a disguised Bhutanese migrant worker. As Taeshik falls in love with Jangmi, a Vietnamese migrant woman, he feels torn whether or not to confess his true identity as Korean. Jangmi needs to marry a Korean man to settle in Korea, but revealing his true identity would jeopardize his job and trust with the people. Despite numerous rehearsals in his confession to Jangmi, he accidentally misspeaks words. Instead of "I'm not Bhutanese but Korean," he says, "I am not Korean but Bhutanese." This mistaken enunciation not only creates a comical moment in the film, but also offers a moment to ponder. Since Taeshik has been performing a false Bhutanese identity for a long time, he himself becomes confused with his true self. Denying the essentialist Korean identity as fixed on bloodline, it implies that identity can be maintained by performance or presentation of self. Despite their sensitivity to diversity and criticism of Korea's social problems, the progressiveness of three films is undermined by the ideological shortcomings. Without a doubt, all three films were mainly produced by the hands of Koreans to appeal to Korean domestic audiences. This resulted in featuring a Korean actor as a lead character, in evidently making the narrative unfold from a Korean protagonist's perspective. As a Korean protagonist's experience becomes the centerpiece of the narrative, racism and hardship of migrant workers became the side story to resolve the Korean protagonist's internal or external conflict. Ultimately, its film ends up celebrating the Korean protagonist's completion of the journey or personal growth from a prejudiced person to a racially tolerant person. While suggesting Korea's tolerance and open-mindedness as an essential step for moving into a multicultural society, all three films promote Korean paternalism, in which a Korean character protects and speaks for migrant workers since they are considered to have little agency to act by themselves. Whereas Ronny initially questions the Korean ethno-nationalism using taekwondo as a symbol of nation, In-ho's defeat underlines that blind nationalism is futile in a new era of multicultural society. However, In-ho's relationship with Duhin ultimately restores his damaged Korean manhood. The critical event at the film's climax proves this idea. In-ho's report of other undocumented migrant workers to the immigration office causes an unfortunate incident in which Duhin is injured and later deported against In-ho's wishes. Feeling extremely guilt for Duhin's misfortune, In-ho heroically carries the wounded Duhin on his back to a hospital in heavy rain. So I'm going to show you the scene. So In-ho is very surprised to find Duhin there because he didn't expect him there. So he's saying, I think my leg's broken. Why are you here? My leg's broken. The leg is broken. Whose legs? Are you coming from the Multicultural Center? Are you a guardian? No. You should go somewhere else. I cannot take anyone with a guardian. Besides, he is a migrant worker. You see, the person is hurt. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm the guardian. I'm the guardian. I'm the guardian. I'm a friend. I'm his friend. Or that's my friend. It can be translated in both ways. That's the clip. So In-ho's angelic guardian role provides him an opportunity to redeem his guilt and restores his broken manhood damaged by Ronny earlier. After being assured by Duhin's recovery on the way back from the hospital, Inho runs into a Korean boy who used to be his pupil. When the boy asks him the details of a certain taekwondo move, Inho confidently teaches him how to do it right and emphasizes that confidence is the most important element in taekwondo. Although he has closed his taekwondo academy, he now reappears fully confident. Restoring the spirit of taekwondo to the next generation, Inho takes on a journey to Bangladesh, carrying Duhin's backpack and his old cassette tape player. This rhetoric of paternalism is prevalent in Banga as well. Taeshik is incompetent and inadequate to conduct various work tasks compared to migrant workers at the factory. However, eventually, Taeshik emerges as an advocate, protector, and leader of the migrant labor movement. Taeshik represents paternalism in his romantic relationship with Jangmi and her son, born from a Vietnamese father. When Jangmi is captured by immigration inspector at the singing contest, he literally saves her and her son by knocking the inspectors out. Jangmi appears as a feminine ideal, a pure and weak minority woman to be protected by a Korean knight. This racialized gender relations reinforces Korea's dominant ideological position as a sub-empire vis-a-vis Southeast Asia. Another ideological shortcoming in the three films is the perpetuation of the migrant workers as culturally alien outsiders and sojourners who are destined to leave Korea or otherwise subject to be deported. It upholds a dominant perspective which claims that there is no need for institutional effort to socially integrate migrants into Korean society. I believe that Takeyuki Juda's proposal of a local citizenship is useful to discuss the ideological implications of such rhetoric. To complement the exclusionary state government's immigration policy in Japan and Korea, he advocates the notion of local citizenship, which refers to local governments and organizations granting basic social political rights and services to immigrants as legitimate residents and equal members of local communities. He argues that this conception based on the residency is useful because it at least will allow local governments and NGOs to actively enforce and protect migrants' rights and offer social services through autonomous and independent policy initiatives and social integration programs. This function to improve immigrants' labor and living conditions. Given that it's impossible. Given that it is possible to institutionally accommodate migrants as a legitimate and equal residents, depicting migrants as forever foreigners or temporary sojourners in these three films can be seen as reactionary. Such representation clearly signifies the political limitations in Korea's imagination of racial otherness, which reflect the dominant view on migrant labor. The opening sequence of Banga portrays migrant workers as assimilated foreigners. It starts with a few migrant workers directly addressing the audience by looking at the camera. In broken Korean, they tell the audience where they are from, what they can offer, and how grateful they will be to find a job. So I'm gonna play the clip here. So there is no subtitle, but even it's very hard to understand their Korean because it's pretty much broken. I work hard and
베트남에서 왔어요.
I'm from Vietnam.
한국 3년 됐어요.
It's been 3 years.
전기 파이프 일면했어요.
I did the electricity job.
감사해요.
If you give me a job, I will be very grateful.
재봉 잘해요. 필리핀에 남편, 아이들 있어요.
My husband and children in Philippines.
남자 안 돼요.
No man in Korea.
돈 많이 주면 일 잘해요.
If you give me lots of money, I will work harder. So that's Tashik as a disguise Bhutanese migrant. I'm from Bhutan.
방가입니다.
Banga.
한국 6년 일해요.
It's been 6 years. He's intentionally speaking in broken Korean.
여가답 많이 했어요.
Manual labor, I'm good at it.
주세요.
Just give me a job. Immigration crackdown. So that's the opening sequence of the movie, which obviously gives you the tone and the direction of the movie. This scene breaks the film's digests in an attempt to present them as closely as possible to the audience. While such a device allows them to be an agency to speak for themselves, their subservient manners and broken Korean undermine this potentially subversive narrative device. Their linguistic deficiency not only highlight their inassimilable differences, but also demonstrate their desperation for acceptance and assimilation. This unconsciously provokes a sense of superiority among Korean audiences. In this presentation, I have examined the cinematic representation of South Asian migrant workers in 3 independent Korean films and their political possibilities and limits. I have argued that while they diversify monocultural Korean cinema and critically reveals the salient social problems in Korean society, this progressive move is undermined by the common ideological rhetoric. However, it would be unproductive to simply dismiss these films as ideologically reactionary. Rather, I would like to suggest turning our attention to the ways in which they broadly mirror the limits within current multicultural policies and practices in Korea. In fact, the themes of Korean paternalism and perpetuation of migrant workers as sojourners are pervasive discourses behind the implementation of multicultural policies on both civil and government levels. The ways in which these films reflect the current problems of policies and practices of multiculturalism in Korean society are illustrative of the preliminary stage of cultural diversity in Korea. It is notable that the process of multiculturalization in Korea has been fairly compressed. It has been less than 20 years since the extensive inflow of migrant labor and marriage migration began, and has brought substantial changes not only to Korea's demographics, but also to the epistemological perception of the nationhood. It is rather natural that Korean society still struggles with its rapid transformation into multicultural society. As much as society itself requires time to adjust to a new challenge and fully embrace diversity as a part of the Korean national identity, it is anticipated that the shift of Korean national cinema from a monocultural cinema to a multicultural cinema will be a gradual process. I am very looking forward to seeing fair and democratic representation of migrants by Korean filmmakers, as well as migrant workers making inroads in the Korean film industry, making their voices heard and creating their own representations. The emergence and developments of the migrant world television, which was formerly named Migrant Workers Television in Korea since 2005, is indicative that such a change is indeed taking place. MWTV also organized an annual film festival to present their work. Yet these media movements still remain within the limited communities of migrants. When migrant media emerges into the mainstream, this may be the right moment in which we can claim Korean cinema has genuinely transformed from a monocultural cinema to a multicultural cinema. Thank you.